Hi everyone, I want to go over the needs assessment with you and how to write a strong paper. Um, I'm going to go over, this is in Unit 2, Demonstrating Need, and not inside any lesson, but down here is where you submit your needs assessment. Before we look at the document, I want to point out that you're going to have a paper with a title page using APA format. One person's been approved to use MLA. And then as a separate document, you're going to have your reference list. The reason why you have a reference list separate is because if it's done correctly, it will be 100% plagiarized. The title page and the paper will use in-text citations. The reference list includes full citation. So I'm going to open this document called a Good Needs Assessment Will. And this is what it looks like. I want to point out that it tells you exactly what to do in the paper. So the first thing it says is it's going to introduce the problem or issue and describe it thoroughly at a national level. So it's going to explain whatever the problem is in your grant. You've identified it in your logic model, and hopefully you've identified it in your outline because it asks for it there. Then you're going to talk about things like epidemiology. What are the mortality and or morbidity factors? How many people have it? What's the incidence of new cases? What's the prevalence? You're going to describe it with data at the national level, whatever's relevant. You're also going to probably identify the population in a very general sense, and you're going to do that by saying whether it's urban or rural, whether it's minority or white, whether it's male or female. You might do it by age. Your grant will give you guidance on that, and you've gotten guidance on that in your feedback on your logic model and in your needs assessment outline. The more specific you are is good, but you do not have to be at a state level at this point. It would confuse the situation. So we're only looking at national information. At the end of this section, you will identify all risk factors, all major risk factors. So you might identify risk factors that you're not going to address, but you still address all major risk factors. After you state what the major risk factors are, you then make a comment, something like the risk factors addressed in this program are, and you identify the risk factors that you will be discussing in your paper. That's the introduction. So that's what this is right here. The next thing it says is to go into detail for each of the risk factors, and you need strong data. I've been giving you feedback on the type of data you need as you're turning in your papers, your assignments. It needs to be written and aligned with the grant goals. So I'm going to be looking for that. So the first section of your paper, and you must use these titles, is Introduction to the Paper. The second section is background information. It is okay to restate the risk factors that you just said prior in saying that the risk factors covered in this program are. It's okay to restate that there. I'm probably going to have you only do it in one place once I read your paper, but it's okay to put it in both places at this point. You're then going to have 1 to 2 paragraphs of details and data for each of the risk factors. A lot of you have mentioned poverty or socioeconomic status. So you would have to identify what is the poverty rate, what is the median income, unemployment might be in there, and you're going to give the national data and then the data for the population that you've started to address. So for example, in the opioid grant, you might say the national income, the national median income is 72,000, In rural areas of the United States, it's 40,000. Or if you're talking about breast cancer and you use socioeconomic status, you might say the median income for women in the United States is 62,000, but for African American or Black women, it is 32,000. And for the IDD mental health grant, you might say the median income for U.S. people who live in the U.S. is 62,000, but for people with IDD or mental health issues, the median income is 28,000. So you need to give that specific data, and you need to give it for each of your risk factors. I've shared information on some of your risk factors that I think are not going to work. I've given you recommendations. The important thing about this is you're going to have 1 to 2 paragraphs per risk factor in its final format. However, as I told you in class, we are in the second or third week of the semester, and I don't expect you to look like you've been in class for over a month. So if, as you're discussing a risk factor, if you know you're missing something, then you would say, I need more details here. If you can't find it, you would say something like, I need more information on socioeconomic status, but I'm having a hard time finding it. Based on what you write, I'll give you feedback, possibly on how to make it better or where to find it. So in the next section, some people submit this in the grant, some people make it a separate document. All I can tell you is it has to be in landscape format. If you know how to go from portrait format to landscape to put your logic model in, back to portrait, it's okay to put in the paper. If you do not know how to do that, make it a separate document. And because it has to be landscape, you cannot put a landscape document into a portrait page and have everything show. So that will either be in your paper or at the very end or a separate document. Then the purpose of your paper, this is where you're copying and pasting the goals from your grant, or as you're getting feedback on your assignments, use the updated goals. So for example, I think it's the IDD grant, had 3 goals and I've cut it down to, I had 5 goals and I cut it down to 3. The cancer grant, I gave you your goals. They're all similar but slightly different from each other. And the opioid grant, I'll talk to you about whether or not you fully understand what those goals are. I think there's 3 or 4. Then the last section of your paper is you're going to summarize the paper. And if you think about how we talked about a burger and writing like a burger, the introduction identifies the issue, the problem, the population, and risk factors. And then in this last section, the summary, you're going to do the same thing in similar prose, but not exactly the same wording. Then this resources is your reference page. This above here is your needs assessment. But what I want to know at this point, at the very end of the paper, after the paper ends, you're going to list resources you think you need. What kind of people, supplies, equipment are you going to need to run this program? This is only marked wrong if it's missing or what you say makes no sense. So if you're doing an opioid grant and you say you need breast screening equipment, you would lose points for that. If you said you needed condoms for the IDD mental health program, I would question that. So as long as what you say makes sense for your grant, you get all the points for these resources that you need. So this is your paper. Introduce it, give the background information, which is going over the risk factors, include the logic model. Only 1, 2, 3, and 4A is what should be completed. Copy and paste the agreed upon goals from your grant, and then summarize the paper. This really could be done in probably 6 or fewer pages if you're very succinct. But at this point, write what you think is important, and I'll be giving you extensive feedback on how to make it more succinct. Thanks for listening, and I hope this has been helpful.